Welcome to our Lunch and Learn series on high expectations. I have a colleague of mine, Liliam, is here with me. She will be answering questions in the chat and helping me in other ways if I need assistance. So anyway, we'll welcome. So this is our Lunch and Learn series. This is the second. We did have a high expectation workshop last week as well for the Lunch and Learn series. And then this will be going one other week and different parts of the high expectations and that workshop. So last week, you probably learned, if you were here, about the history of people with disabilities and how advocacy has played an important role in giving people with disabilities more opportunities. You also learned about the rise of the disability movement and how it grew quickly into what it is today. The movement was started by those with disabilities who simply wanted to be included in their communities, in employment and educational opportunities. Advocacy is an ongoing part of this process, and through this series, we will learn how we can help our children reach their full potential. So again, my name is Leslie Hansen. I am a parent consultant and have a 13-year-old boy with disabilities. At the Utah Parent Center, we are parents helping parents. So each of us has a parent of a child in special education. We understand from the parent perspective what it's like working with our special education teams. We do one-on-one consultations, present workshops and trainings throughout the state, and all of our services are free. The Utah Parent Center is a statewide nonprofit organization that helps families navigate special education. So let's get started. We'll have time after the presentation for questions, and with that, let's talk about high expectations, seeing the ability and disability, challenging our perception of disabilities. How do we define bias? It is a tendency, an inclination, or a prejudice towards or against something or someone. Our unconscious bias can affect how we perceive the world around us. It can also affect how we view our children and their future with disabilities. Let's go over some of these examples and see if you've had these thoughts at one time or another. People with disabilities always need help. The lives of people with disabilities are totally different than the lives of people without disabilities. People with disabilities cannot lead a productive and fulfilling life. People with disabilities are helpless and dependent. And people with disabilities aren't capable of determining their own future. As parents, one of the best gifts we can give our children, youth, and young adults with disabilities is to set high expectations for them at home, at school, and in the community. Multiple studies have shown that parents' expectations about their youth skills, education, and abilities influence the type of outcomes our youth will achieve, and they are also linked to academic achievement. So we're going to just watch a short clip of this video. And in this video, Laura Whitaker is the director of an organization called Extra Special People, and she encourages us to view differences as ability, not a disability.
Let's do great things.
Sorry about that.
Words come to mind when you hear the word daffodil? The average adult would respond with spring, beauty, yellow, sunshine. Now, what words come to mind when you hear the word dandelion? The average adult would respond with weed, weed killer, roundup, nuisance. In contrast, if you ask the average 5-year-old what words come to mind when they see a dandelion, they would respond with pretty, fun, flower for mommy, make a wish. Many of you may be parents and can remember a time that your child collected dandelions from your overgrown lawn that you meant to mow last week, or maybe that's lingering on that honey-do list. Others of you may have a memory yourself of collecting dandelions and weaving them into a necklace or a crown, or maybe simply taking it in seed form and blowing it to make a wish. You see, children see dandelions in the same way that adults see daffodils. They see both as beautiful yellow flowers, and they see joy, not nuisance, in the attributes of a dandelion. And this is the exact same view that the average child has on people with disabilities. We as adults can use the common childhood experience of the dandelion to remind us to shift our perspectives on people with disabilities and inspire us to find those abilities within ourselves to give away.
I love this clip. Adults often see the world differently than a small child. How wonderful would it be to leave our bias behind and embrace the future of our children with our 5-year-old perspective? It can be done through this series, and hopefully you can come away with the inspiration and tools to dream big for your child during this Lunch and Learn series. Live your best life. My advice to other disabled people would be concentrate on things your disability doesn't prevent you doing well, and don't regret the things it interferes with. Don't be disabled in spirit as well as physically. And that was from Stephen Hawking, who was an English theoretical science physicist, cosmologist, and author, and who was the director of research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology at the University of Cambridge. The measure of a man or woman is not so much what they've accomplished, though that has weight. It is often much more than that man or woman has overcome to accomplish what they have. And that is from Leif Gergersen. He is an author of the book called Through the Withering Storm. And in this book, he chronicles his life as a pilot living with bipolar disorder. I do not have a disability, I have a gift. Others may see my disability, but as I see it as a challenge. This challenge is a gift because I have to become stronger to get around it and smarter to figure out how to use it. Others should be so lucky. This is from Shane Bryan. Shane has a condition called in this condition, your hands become contorted. Though he is not able to use his hands or write, he did become an author. What do we know about having high expectations? Families that consistently set high expectations, such as hard work, sacrifice, and discipline within a loving and supportive, structured home, have a better chance of creating that same vision in people who educate and employ their child. Youth with disabilities who have more expected of them are more likely to live fully integrated lives and have a greater opportunity to strive toward their own hopes and dreams. Youth with high expectations may have more educational options and better paying jobs that match their abilities and interests. And I want to read a parent testimonial of high expectations. When my daughter was first diagnosed with autism, the focus was on all the things she couldn't do and may not be able to do in the future. Instead of dwelling on the negative, I soon realized the importance of focusing on the things she could do. Celebrating small victories soon led to greater victories, and she was able to accomplish more than what was predicted early on. By having high expectations, a lot of patience, and finding needed support, I quickly learned to never underestimate my child. And I have a personal experience about this. My son does not have a real diagnosis. So he is undiagnosed, and we really don't know what the future holds for him. But I have always strived to know that he can do more maybe than what his certain abilities are at this time. I've always thought about the future and have tried to keep that in mind as we are going through his education and going through community programs that he is in, that the sky is the limit for him. And I, as a parent, just have to believe that for him and be able to support him gaining his full potential. It's also important to know that you as a parent having high expectations for your child, having to communicate those expectations to other people in your family, perhaps, educational professionals, professionals that work with your child outside of the home. It's always good to communicate those high expectations to them. But maybe first knowing what kind of dreams you may have for your child, and then as they grow older, what kind of dreams do they have for themselves? What kind of things do they want to do and accomplish in their life, and where do they want to go? So as we go through this series, Liliam next week will be going over how we as parents can help in as our child is elementary age, middle school age, and high school age, and even beyond. So there are so many different programs available to our students as they get older and become young adults. And Lilian will be able to go over all of that information next week. But today, we really just wanted to focus on maybe changing our perception of what disability means and being able to gain some insight on what our students and children can be doing to reach those high expectations or the life that they want. So with that, we have a lot that we can talk about. If you guys want to, we can open that up for discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And
Leslie, we
yes.
have one question. I don't know if you mentioned it. I didn't get that, but
Okay.
Some people want to know what is Shane's disability. The last person.
What is Shane's disability?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he has dystonia, and I'm not familiar with that at all. But what it is, and maybe I was muted during that time, but his hands don't work. And so for him to become an author, that he had some challenges, some barriers to overcome because his hands aren't working. He can't really type or write, but was able to become an author. So that is a great story of overcoming those challenges, definitely.
And there's another question. Thank
Sure.
you, Leslie. In the chat, can you provide some suggestion about how to communicate our expectations with providers? We are only hearing what they can't or won't do.
Sure, that's a wonderful question, and we'll go over it today, and then Lilian, I believe, will go into more like a to-do list next week. But going into those IEP meetings, and I'm not sure if your child has an IEP or even a 504, and letting them know your child's strengths. What can they do? And what do you see happening for them in the future? You as a parent can see so much more of your child and how they engage in the world. The school and the teachers at the school really only see a snapshot of what your child can do, but you as a parent can see probably and hopefully the full picture. I know in my situation, it's been a little bit hard because my son can do so many more things with one-on-one support through tutoring or therapists. But then when you get him at school and they're doing the testing at school, there's a disconnect there between what he can do at home or with a one-on-one therapist versus what he can do at school. And so when I hear those things during IEP meetings, I do stop the team and say, you know what, he is doing these things at home. He's doing this and this. And I would like to continue to help him progress so that he can use those skills in the school setting, because different settings can be hard to transition skills to. But letting the team know, look, he does this at home. And maybe that can help open their eyes. I also think that in your IEP meetings, you do have something towards the top of your IEP. It's called present levels or a PLAFIP. That's a really good opportunity for you as a parent to put some input into what the team sees and what that present level is. So you as a parent make those observations at home and then can include that information on that PLAFIP or present level of the IEP. A lot of the time, if the team hasn't been able to contact you before that IEP meeting to get your input on the present levels, they'll do so at the meeting, and they'll say, you know, parent, do you have anything to add to this? And that's a real good time for you to say, yes, he is doing so much at home, and being able to access this community support or this community support. And so they know that you at home are really trying and getting that student or the child involved in progressing for their future.
Thank you. And we also have, can you address how to set high expectations without setting them up for failure? For example, I feel like I do set high expectations, and as a result, my son feels like he is disappointing me and it's affecting his self-image.
Sure. And this is something that Lilian will also go over next week as well. But I do think it's important to, we can set high expectations, but there's baby steps to get there. And sometimes if your student has an IEP, you may notice that there's goals on the IEP, but then there's benchmark goals or smaller goals. And what they're doing is trying to gain the steps needed to reach that main goal. And so maybe you as a parent, if you have a goal for them at home, maybe trying to break down that goal into smaller chunks, smaller steps for them to be able to do. So, you know, like for instance, if it was a chore and you have this goal of your child completing this chore by themselves with no prompts, no input from you, well, how are we going to get the child there? And so if we work backwards and we say, okay, well, first, my child needs to be able to recognize the steps of or sequence of a certain chore, and then being able to each step of that chore, being able to support the child and teach them each step of that, where at some point they may be able to do that chore completely by themselves with no prompts, input from mom or dad. Hopefully that kind of helped. If not, like I said, next week we will be going into more of that to-do list for parents and really, but I do think just breaking down those goals into smaller bite-sized chunks might be helpful. And each time they reach that smaller goal, they may feel a sense of accomplishment and that confidence needed to then go to the next step and accomplish that benchmark goal.
Thank you, Leslie. Those are all the questions in the chat, but
you know what, and Lilian, we can open that up. We have a few minutes. We can open it up to any discussion. Anyone have an experience of how they were able to help their child reach a goal? Or how you've communicated to your IEP teams about your child's goals and the high expectations you have for them?
you can just unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Darlene.
Hi, Darlene.
Hi. So it's not one of his IEP goals, but here at the house, we had a goal of him. We just unspoken goal of, well, he needs to learn how to tie his own tie.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband worked with him in, a few times, but we knew eventually we wanted him to do it on his own first. So first it took repetitive, my husband doing it over his shoulder behind him, several times, but then more and more he would do a little bit less and less of the work. And so it might not have, the steps might not progress as fast as we think. And but they do eventually happen. We got to the point where my husband would just remind him with the spoken word instead of physically hand over hand. Then he'd remind him, okay, with the spoken word. And now he's tying it on his own. But yeah, the little baby steps I love. But so that was our success, is he's tying his tie on his own now.
That is so great. I'm so glad. And it does take it does take a long time. My daughter, who is typical, will always say, well, why can't Fisher's my son? Why can't Fisher do this? Or why can't Fisher do this by himself? And I just have to remind her, I do have to do things differently with him. And we do have to have baby steps before he can clean the entire bathroom by himself. We need those baby steps. And I've always found it helpful too, to write down kind of the order of events too, like the sequence of maybe what he needs to do. Either write it down or have a visual schedule there for him to be able to follow, so that he is doing it independently, but so I'm not right there prompting him and doing hand over hand, but that he can look and see what is next. And those are things, those types of skills, as he gets older, as your children get older, and they are going into their young adult years, that they can find jobs, that they can go and further their education, that we have high expectations for them to do those things without us constantly being there. So it's a good time to just kind of, again, baby steps and get them to the point where they can feel comfortable doing those things for themselves.
Hello.
Hi,
I'd
Carol.
like to share one if you don't mind.
Sure.
My name's Carolyn, and the thing I find I'm doing is I'm always telling everyone how intelligent and capable my son is. And then I realize on a day-to-day basis that I am doing a lot of things for him that he could potentially be doing for himself, simply because we've just always done it that way. And so sometimes he'll start to do it for himself, and I'll have to catch myself and go, oh yeah, he's smart, he's capable, let him do it. And when I find him struggling, one of his goals is to speak and to vocalize when he needs help. And so even then, my tendency is to jump in. Oh, do you need help? I'll do it for you. And I have to just kind of bite my tongue and tie my hands behind my back and go, okay, I'll wait. And then when he finally looks to me and says that he needs help, then I'll jump in. But I think for me, the reason why I'm interested in this workshop is because I just have to break that mindset of always just, I love him, so I want to help him. I don't want to see him struggle, but I'm actually doing the opposite for him when I'm jumping in. I'm not making his life any better or easier. And so that's something that I would recommend, is just kind of taking a step back and just seeing what they're capable of without doing simple tasks for them that they can do for themselves.
Carolyn, I think that's great. And I do the same thing. I do have to catch my son, who is now 13. So if some of you have been able to attend our transition workshops, my son will be transitioning at age 14. And then it kind of picks up where they're going to have to kind of think for themselves of, what do I want my future to look like? How can I get there? And so I really am finding myself and catching myself more. But I do think it's good to be aware of the fact that we may do that for our children, because we do love them and we don't want them to fail. But sometimes there's a saying that says the dignity to fail, giving them that dignity to risk something and be able to fail, but also being there obviously to pick them up and support them, but letting them take those risks on their own. If they don't succeed the first time, then going back to the drawing board, figuring out what supports they need, and then going back and trying it again. So that's all part of having those high expectations for our children as well.
I like to add to that, Leslie, that sometimes it's also more convenient for us just to do it for them. And I put myself an example also, like with my son, like getting him ready in the morning. So then now I started, because I mean, not, right now he can like dress and undress himself. He's still having a hard time with socks and shoes. But only a few months ago, he was always like, help me, because he knew that I would just run to do it. And it was like, okay, he'll be done and I won't have to stress about it. So then now I'm allowing ourselves to have more time so he can try on his own and master finally that last part of that the dressing and undressing. So
That's great. Being able to just kind of look into the future, and sometimes we're, as parents, we're living just day to day, just surviving, right? But if we can look into that future of our child, and what kind of things, what kind of skills are they going to need to be able to possibly live independently, go to college. There's a lot of college programs now available for children with disabilities, young adults with intellectual disabilities and other disabilities. Again, Lillian will talk about those next week. But there are becoming more and more opportunities for our children. And so how can we get them to a place where they feel comfortable and they have the knowledge, right, or the skills to be able to access all of this great, these great programs that are coming up and being created. And it's a great motivator for me, as I hope you find next week, that good things are in store for my son. I just need to help him get there. So any other comments or questions? Is anyone kind of in the beginning of this journey and is having a hard time seeing the future? Tara, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Oh, I just have a son that's been diagnosed with ADHD and anxiety. And so we are just in the very beginning of starting a process to have him evaluated at his school. And he's in kindergarten. And so, yeah, it's very much a process of expectation versus reality.
And Tara, I would say don't ever stop dreaming, right? I think I'm kind of lucky in a way that my son's not put, necessarily in a box because he doesn't have a diagnosis, but just always dreaming. And I think that as we've seen in the workshop, in the slides, those high expectations, families that consistently set those high expectations, those children have better outcomes. And so just kind of, it's still really early for you, but kind of keeping that in mind that there is a future, right? There is a future for him.
I think also community and, connecting with other families that are, in a similar situation, maybe with the same diagnosis, but then are farther ahead. For me, like it's given me hope talking to Patricia. She's another parent consultant, and she also, my son has Down syndrome, and her daughter, my son is 10 and her daughter is 20 something, maybe 22, 23. And I was telling her just the other day, like, yeah, I don't see he's gonna be as independent like Aranza is, because she can stay at home on her own, and then I can't see my son doing that. And she was like, no, like, when she was his age, I can't even see, like, maybe he in some areas, like, it's a lot farther ahead than she was. So I'm sure he's gonna do it. And that really, is someone that already walked the path. So it helps, Tara. So just find, that community, the other families that, you can look up to and say, well, they did it, and, we can do it as well.
¿Por qué dice rec? No, pero yo no quiero rec. Yo quiero.
Does anyone else have any comments or questions for us?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Sure, Joe.
Yeah, so my son, he's 9 years old, and I swear I think he has ODD, or oppositional defiance order. And we, as we speak, new tutors are coming to our home, and he's just screaming bloody murder and hitting my wife, and not being able to understand or, I don't know, deal with the situation. I mean, Last night I was giving him a bath and he can't do it without my help. I've tried leaving many times and he just melts down, screams, can't do it. And at church, I try to leave him with his peers and stuff, but another meltdown, he can't handle it. And I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, and I hear you. And how old is your son?
9.
9. Okay. Yeah, so there can be supports in place, say for instance, in church settings, that may be able to kind of help that type of behavior. Sometimes it comes down to behavior, and I don't know if he's having challenges at school with behavior, as well as home. It's kind of weird. Some kids will act out at home and not at school, or vice versa.
Well, we homeschool because the typical school was just too much for him.
Okay. Okay. Well, Joe, I do think, and we can definitely, if you want to call the center, we can talk more about your specific situation. But it is important to figure out maybe why he reacts that way to the tutor coming in, or to different situations. Maybe it's transitioning from activity to activity. Maybe it's the person that's triggering. Maybe it's the time of day, those types of things. So we can definitely give you some pointers on behavior and how we can support behavior at home and at school if it was going to school. But that seems to be a lot of things that parents are dealing with as well, and what I dealt with as a parent when my son was younger. There were certain things that were triggers, and I didn't quite know what those triggers were. But once I figured out those triggers, we were able to kind of work with making sure the situation didn't escalate to the point where I'm in tears and he is in tears, and it just a really not a great situation. So, but Joe, please call the center. We can certainly talk to you more. Our time is up, but if any of you have any questions or would like to know more about specifics for your child and what's available for your child, maybe they're transition age 14 and up, and you're wondering what there is available for them, we can certainly help you that way as well. And please come back next week for a more in-depth conversation and more in-depth information about what is available for your student and how we can help them get there.
Leslie,
Yes.
I launched the poll.
Oh, good.
So
Yeah, if you guys could take a minute to fill out the poll. We do get funding through grants and other sources. We are a nonprofit, and so this helps meet our requirements for our grant, and also lets us know what type of information that you would like to see us bring to you, and what we can do better to communicate that information for you. So thank you so much for attending, everyone, and we will see you next week.
I typed the center phone number and our email addresses in the chat. So if you want to copy that before we leave.
And there was one other question while we're leaving. Does Utah Parent Center have a list of trusted credentialed therapists that would recommend help families navigate settings for their kids? And we do have Utah Family Voices. That is another project within our organization that may be able to talk to you about what type of insurance you have and what is available for therapists and doctors and other professionals. Lillian, do you have anything to say about that?
I typed their phone number, the direct line for Family Voices, and yeah, that would be a great starting point so you can get some information regarding credentialed therapists. We sometimes consult, I used to work in that program, psychologytoday.com. I'm typing it too. And you can narrow your search by the area of expertise and also location, or if you want to virtual or face-to-face. So if you want to do it on your own, if not, then you can give us a call and we'd be happy to find resources for you.
And one question from Bobby, do you have parent support groups for kids with behavioral problems? Bobby, we don't have those at the center. However, we can talk to you about behavioral supports. And I believe probably Utah Family Voices might be able to, they may have information on support groups available. And that's something that you would want to give that number a call, or the center a call in general, and we can help you with your behavioral concerns. It looks like we had one other question come in, maybe. Oh, psychologytoday.com. So Liliam, did you put that in the chat?
Yes, that's one where they can search for specialists.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And we are so glad that you were with us for this lunchtime. So bye, everyone.